So in chapter 9, Paul started this, chapters 9 through 11 deal with the issue of what about Israel, right? Because after all this 1 through 8, where he talks about how everybody's on the same footing, there's this question of what about Israel? Because God's made all these promises to them. You know, are those promises null and void? Is Israel just to be ignored now? Are Gentiles more important? And what's going on there? And in chapter 9, he addresses the first part of that question where he says basically, he's addressing the issue of if God made promises to Israel, how is it that he's not saving all of them? And his answer is essentially God's always reserved the right to save the faithful remnant of Israel, those faithful few, and that the majority of Israel that's rebellious, God has never promised salvation to them. In fact, he's promised judgment when they're wicked. So God's reserved the right to recognize that there is a part of Israel that is true Israel, whereas the majority of Israel may be in rebellion. So in chapter 11, the question kind of turns then, and so the question becomes, well, if the majority of Israel can be rebellious and God can still be faithful to his covenant by not saving them, is there anybody left? Like, are there any Jews left? And that's where Paul answers the question by saying, well, of course there are still Jews in covenant with God. Look at me, I'm a Benjamite. I'm still in covenant with God. And then he uses this story from the story of Elijah when Elijah's in the wilderness. In 1 Kings chapter 19, there's a story where he's fled to the wilderness because he's heard that Ahab and Jezebel have basically put out a warrant to kill all of the priests and leaders of God, so the prophets of God. And so he's in the wilderness and he's lying on the ground and he's sobbing and he's crying in 1 Kings 19, Elijah is. And what he's crying about is that he feels like he's the only one left and he might even die soon. And he's begging God, he's saying, why has all Israel turned aside? I'm the only one left, just kill me. And that's when God, through an angel, ministers to Elijah and basically says, no, you're not the only one. There's always been more. In fact, he tells Elijah there's 7,000 more that are still faithful to me. And so Paul's point here is to make the same point. We may see that most of Israel is rebellious, but never forget that just like in the time of Elijah, there will always be Israelites who fear God, which means in Paul's time, there are still Israelites who recognize Christ and who recognize him as Messiah. He hasn't given up on the Jewish people.